Nice. All right. So, Tony, you want to kick us off with the first question we received?
Now it's on? Okay. First of all, it's really hard to choose. Thank you for all the questions. We're going to actually type these up and figure out how to share them, both with the panelists who might want to respond, but we could think about creating a forum where we can keep some of this conversation going, so that, because the folks up here, as they were just saying, said, you know, they have their perspective. We know there's so much expertise and ideas out in the audience as well. So we'll figure out some way of sharing the rest of these questions with folks and keep the conversation going. We've narrowed it down to two that we have time for. The first is, do you believe the current political climate has led to an increase in sexual assaults, or do you think that it's just provides a platform for victims to speak out? Is it actually increasing, just decreasing, plateauing? What's been the impact here, and how does that connect to the work and conversation we're having here today?
So I can start. So there was a recent study done by the organization is slipping my mind now, but it's the National Sexual something national. They did, yes, I promise. You can look it up. They do a study every 2 years to talk specifically about hate crimes and things like that. And actually, the amount of hate crimes towards queer and trans folks has increased about 5% since 2016. And while that might not seem like a big number, it's huge because we're talking about something like 25% to 30% of queer and trans folks are experiencing hate crimes, not just from other people, but in addition to police. So police violence has also escalated towards queer and trans folks. And so, I mean, I think we have more Black trans women were killed this year than last year. So all of the violences are, I'm not sure if they are escalating or if there's more light being brought to them. I think that especially with hate crimes in the queer and trans community, it becomes very hard to track because oftentimes we don't go to the police and we don't report these things. And so now I know that within my own community, we are starting to develop ways to be able to report things more. So I think that it's sort of a both-and situation where there are people who have been emboldened by the current political climate to be able to say and do things that they never, they just didn't outright say before. And people are feeling like their voice really does matter, they can say things, and so in that way, they're able to talk about these things, even if it's like me or many other high schoolers who say things on social media, who say things to their friends and parents, who then the word goes around and they all create systems that way. So I think that this is another one of those situations that's very fluid.
I'll just simply say that I ditto everything Dre said, and what I would add to it is what we also have, a new and emboldened, young resistance that's really growing as a result of all of that. So that's, that's a wonderful thing coming out of some of this horrible stuff.
Can I say something too? Whoa, that's real. That was supposed to be a whisper. Didn't happen. I think also that we are in an age that is really wonderful for connection, in which technology is something that folks can connect with people all over the world, but it also means that, and it means that people can use their voice and amplify their voice, amplify other people's voices, but what it also means is we are exposed to trauma in a wide-scale way. And so I think that when we talk about has the political climate created an opportunity for more violence to happen or more people to speak out? I think I echo what Dre said, is that it's probably a both and also we as humans are witnessing more violence than we would have in the absence of technology, and with that comes more trauma. We know that witnessing violence is also something that is damaging to us just as much as, not as much, but just as experiencing it and perpetrating violence is damaging to humans. So I think that with the widespread influx of our news stories really showing graphic violence and really talking about the widespread experience of violence, I think we're all also experiencing that vicarious trauma and that vicarious violence and healing to work towards healing, because that is really damaging as well and not making sense anymore, but who wants it next?
I just wanted to add something. So there was a recent study about the reduction of violence against women, but it was white women, and black women still at higher risk of assault and domestic violence, as well as indigenous women. So I don't know if it has anything to do with the current climate necessarily, but I think that we've gotten better at collecting data, thanks to DPH for collecting data and asking us to collect that data. So I think that for that reason, we are able to see a little bit more about the issues and see what's happening. However, I echo what Dren mentioned, that I think that given our current climate, it's given permission to other folks that before were sort of in their closet, talking about that, and now they're totally out and really committing the assault that they were already committing, but sort of in the shadows, but now like bluntly doing it.
And I would just add that, even though I'm not on the panel, that, how we tie this conversation to the Reimagine Manhood theme is, again, that this is an opening. This political climate, the conversation we're having, has been a time when we have seen some more men speak out as allies, and where I think we can create more opportunities for men to speak out as allies, both cisgender men, primarily speaking about cisgender men, to speak out not only around violence against women, about transphobia, around homophobia, but about the attacks on reproductive rights, on the rollbacks on Title IX. You can go down the many policies that are all connected here, and so we need to make sure that we're mobilizing and also calling in to say, if you say you care about this issue, it's not just about how you act in your own personal lives, it's also about joining us in this real political fight, in this political climate, to bring that power to bear around these issues that we're facing every single day on a global level and not just on an interpersonal level.
So we'll do one more question that spoke out, and then we'll actually ask the panel for your closing message before we go into the actual closing. And this relates to actually the first question, and then the grounding that Tony Porter said at the beginning, right? That today was about, this length, and there's these men over here that aren't doing it, right? That small section of it. So this person wrote, it seems like much of the messaging about engaging men is targeted toward those who are more apt to listen. So with the rise of violently misogynistic white supremacist ideologies like incels, how do you engage men who have already been radicalized by these ideologies? So I think, feel free, how are you, right?
I can, to sort of repeat what I had said earlier, part of that is in my community, right? So I'm not speaking to white, cisgender, heterosexual men who identify as incels, and right? Like, that's not my community, because that is labor I am not currently invested in doing, and I think that for me, that's like, you have white, trans, or white, cisgender, heterosexual men who are to be doing that work within their own community. For me, I don't know if some of you have heard of sort of the equivalent being like this black supremacist rise, or like there's people who believe within the black community essentially that like black men should take the role of basically white men. And it's very strange. On Twitter, they're like aligned and they agree on so many points. And within my community, especially with like black, trans, masculine, or center people, it's a lot about reframing masculinity. So sort of what Tony was talking about earlier, as people who are inducted into manhood, there are certain things that we learn, not necessarily explicitly sometimes, but just through watching other men. And for me, it's helping, especially like high school age trans folks, be able to deconstruct that so that they don't adopt those violent ideologies and feel boxed into that man box themselves. And in cases, I do come up with young people who have and feel like that's the way they need to act because that's how men act. And in engaging those people, I mean, again, it's different because it's like we're talking about trans folks who have a very different relationship to gender. So it's more about being able to be critical and being able to realize that that ideology is hurting you, and then going outwards. Because once you realize it's hurting yourself, I think Will said something like that earlier, once you realize it's hurting yourself, then it's easier to recognize how it's hurting others.
Yeah, in terms of it being, you know, it's not really Dre's community, but it's kind of my community. Maybe not full-on incels, but definitely a less receptive crowd, and a crowd that's, I mean, there are kids at my school who are very hateful and very misogynistic, and I can't say that I've looked like a white supremacist or an incel in the face that I know of. But I do think, and part of it is because I am privileged enough to be, like I have white privilege, I'm a straight white male who can kind of connect with the other straight white males who are espousing hateful views. They'll accept me as a messenger. But like I said before, it's mostly about the best way of changing minds is interpersonal communication. And unfortunately, we can't reach every incel on every corner of the internet. Which is really, really annoying, because I do think the best way as a white male for me to change the minds of other white males is to look them in the face as somebody of their own tribe, the way they see the world in you know, a very tribalistic view. If I look at them and I say, I am a white male, and I recognize that a lot of what I've been privileged to experience is inherently harmful to others, and I recognize that I possess some attitudes that are harmful to others. Hopefully they can start to see that. So interpersonal communication, I think, is the best way to change minds. If they hate, if like incels hate, it's out of fear and hurt, as Tony talked about. So hopefully by looking them in the eyes and saying, I acknowledge your fear, I acknowledge your hurt, but here's how you're externalizing that into anger that is hurting so many others. Hopefully that's a way forward. But like I said, it's a challenge. It usually takes interpersonal looking them in the face and saying, this is, I don't know, forcing them to recognize their own issues. Yeah, that's all I got.
So along with what Will is sharing about working with them individually, there's another way to go about this also. See, first, it's more for me is about we as a collective body of men. I believe that when you talk about incel or men who are extremists, they don't get to be who they are without the permission of us. Mm-hmm. We're in it, you know, and I think it's owning that we collectively as men have created the fertile ground for them to exist. I think it's owning that if there's a real shown enough critical mass of us, we would have a huge impact on their ability to exist. They exist, you know, and there's another piece that we have to own is, you know, oppression requires violence, right? You have racism, it requires violence against people of color. You have classism, it requires violence against financially poor people. You know, if we're looking at this through a lens of sexism, you know, in order for those of us who don't perpetrate violence against women and girls to have the privileges that come with a male-dominating society, the violence has to be perpetrated against women and girls. And so, in essence, or say mathematically speaking, these men are doing our bidding, right? They are working on our behalf. And so I think it's more about we coming together collectively. We truly come to collectively together, create that critical mass that needed. We will do away with them just by the way we join. But right now we haven't joined. So instead of dealing with them individually so much, I would rather see what's left of their operation if we truly came together as a collective of men. I think that's That has a lot to do. And it's no different if we were talking about undoing racism, right? The militias and all of those folks that we look down on, well, they're doing the bidding of white folks in general. Some of y'all was with me a second ago and might get pissed off at me right now. But there's truth to that, right? There's truth to that. That to, continue a race construct, there has to be violence against people of color, right? And so while we as individuals can say, I'm not about that, it's being done on our behalf. And how we come together as a critical mass, I think once we do that, then we can look back and we can look and see, well, how does it look now? Because, right now, they're working for us. In some respect, man, those men that we're talking about on the fringes, they're helping us to maintain a male-dominated society that we walk the streets with and enjoy the benefits of every day.
Thank you so much. So as we close out, we're going to ask the panelists in just your kind of few words, one last message to the group in this room that are committed to ending gender-based violence. And we'll have that last word. I'll pull a Tony actually and just put my own real quick. And that's got to be the Center for Open Healing's Brotherhood of Strengths, part of the movement to free Cyntoia Brown. So those that don't know about free Cyntoia Brown, if you haven't done so already, call the Governor of Tennessee, Governor Haslam, ask that he grant clemency to Cyntoia Brown, this victim of sex trafficking. So that's mine, and I'll just pass it down.
I think that Nikki and a couple others may have heard me say this before in the office, but I can't remember who said this, but it stuck with me throughout college, and it's that the ultimate goal of oppression is to get those that are oppressed to do its bidding. And so for me, it's important for we all to sit with that and to think about that, to think about and be critical about how you navigate the world, because all of us hold we all hold power. And how then do we use our power for good, and how do we use our power to help others, and then how do we use our power to put people down? And have enough love for yourself to change.
I think that I spend a lot of time having conversations about the state of things and how we wish it was different, and how we are all very, very committed to that. And I think that something that I feel really passionate about is not only just thinking about what would the world look like if things were different, or what do we want it to be, but also what are the skills that we need to get there. We spend a lot of time reimagining relationships and reimagining manhood, but how do we connect those dots from today to what that future would be? And I think a lot of that is not just raising awareness and having these conversations, but also trying to give ourselves some concrete skills and practice to be able to do something differently.
Just, in engaging men, to be able to meet men where they're at. Not having an expectation that they have to come a certain way along the linear spectrum in order for me to engage them. To meet men where they're at, and to do that and be able to do that without colluding with them is an art versus science. To love men through the process and hold them accountable at the same time is an art versus science. But I think those are the two skills that we as men need to employ in the engagement of other men.
This one's the louder one. Yeah, I'm not naive enough to think that I have all the answers, or that this is not a systemic problem and a very intersectional problem that I definitely don't know how to completely address. But at least on a daily basis, mostly to fellow high schoolers, hi guys, a conscious departure from gender roles in how we talk about our problems, and a conscious attempt to break out of that man box is just a good thing to do, and something that doesn't require a lot of effort. In fact, it will be easier to live your life as a high schooler if you aren't so worried about gender roles and expectations all the time. So it's not the be-all, end-all, but it's a small step that we can take as high schoolers. and as we grow up through high school and become seniors and we become a model for younger kids, show them what it means to be have a healthy view of manhood, and show them what it means to just be in touch with your own emotions and have empathy for others. So, little rosy message there.
So this year, Jane Doe, we started our Reimagine Manhood convenings, and we got some pushback of like how we wanted to do them. So it's a male identified space only, and we got some pushback from women who are doing the work, which is great, and I know that the work of anti-violence and sexual assault and domestic violence started with women, and yet we women need to create spaces and allow those spaces to happen, because the work of men, just like Tony said, needs to happen with men. So we all need to feel comfortable or get uncomfortable with that idea of being able to do that. So we have been doing that, and it's like hashtag real talk. They really get to talk about what they need to do. Because I don't longer want to be telling them what they need to do. I don't have the time, I don't have the courage to do it anymore. They need to do their own work. And we need to let that happen as women.
Thank you all so much. I just want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank all of you for sticking with us through this conversation. We have gift bags for all of you here that we will give when we break from this part. And we also want to get a quick picture of the panel, so don't go running off. All right, 1, 2, 3, up. Let's go.
Wait, don't leave, by the way, yet. There's a closing.
Don't leave. We got a quick closing. You don't want to miss it. It's a very special musical treat. Okay, so grab your seats, or maybe not, because you're not going to.
Okay, I'm speaking now. Thanks. So thanks to the panelists. Before you all live in, a couple of things. You all have evaluations at your tables. Please take a few minutes to do the evaluations. We really appreciate your feedback. This will help us to inform next year's symposium. And our closing